Hi, my name is Amanda Panacea, and you're listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. This is a community for self-healers, biohackers, practitioners, and any other helping professionals. You're in the right place if you're seeking conversations about how pain becomes passion, the connection between physical, energetic, mental, and our spiritual self, finding your body's ancient wisdom, the latest biohacking technologies, clinical research, and if you just want to nerd out about complex biochemistry and quantum physics. But this is also for entrepreneurs who seek infinite abundance and a supportive community. So pour a cup of King coffee or Sisters tea and let's join the revolution. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Healer Revolution podcast. I am your host, Amanda Panacea. Today, I have a really incredible guest. Her name is Katherine Housh. We are new friends after I found her looking for other practitioners who were knowledgeable and using German New Medicine with their clients. Katherine is a trauma-informed health coach and a German New Medicine consultant, and she works with both men and women, specifically with autoimmune disease, although she works with a broad range as well. She is also a former registered nurse, and her specialty is helping others break the cycle of fear and chronic symptoms by learning to speak their body's language. She has a community called the Autoimmune Resolution, where she has helped hundreds of members create an authentic life that they don't have to heal from without restrictive diets or protocols. So you all are really going to enjoy my conversation with Katherine. She has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to German New Medicine or Germanic healing knowledge, and she explains these really complex concepts really well. Plus, on top of that, she has her own incredible healing journey of using German New Medicine to heal from autoimmune diseases, which, of course, she was told were completely incurable. So I know you all are really going to love this. Enjoy, and welcome to the revolution. Hello, everyone. I am Amanda Panacea, and welcome to the Healer Revolution. I am really excited today to introduce and have a conversation with my friend, Katherine Housh. So hi, Katherine. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really thrilled because I'm sure the listeners have listened to the other podcast that I had with another guest that really went into German New Medicine a little bit. And you are, I would say, an expert in this topic. And so I'm really excited to hear your story, how you got into German New Medicine, and then how you use it in your practice today.
Good, yeah. So I guess would it help if I started with my story?
Yeah, oh yeah, go for it. Be as detailed and, graphic as you want.
I guess I'm like so many of us that work in this field. It started with my own health problems, and I was a teenager just out of high school. And I was diagnosed with a digestive illness, ulcerative colitis, which at that time they still weren't quite calling it autoimmune. And I remember getting the classic, face-to-face with my doctor, this is what you have. There's no cure. You'll be sick the rest of your life. You need to take medication. You may eventually need surgery. And I came from a medical family of doctors and nurses, and I was in nursing school myself. My mom was kind of like the black sheep of the family. She was really into alternative holistic things. So when they gave me that prognosis, like immediately my gut just went, no, I don't believe that. I'm only 18. I've never taken medication a day in my life. I don't believe this. This can't be possible. So I went down the route of looking at lifestyle, looking at nutrition, stress management. I went to therapy, and the other intuition I had all along the way was I really felt strongly that what was happening in my physical body was related to mental, emotional trauma that I had experienced earlier in life. And I remember looking at my specialist, my gastroenterologist, and he wanted to start putting me on biologic medications and immunosuppressants. And I was like, I really just think if I could get away from these 1 or 2 toxic family members, I'd really be okay. And he said, that doesn't sound reasonable. I don't think that's possible. You need the hard medication. So I took them. And it was still always there in the back of my mind. So eventually, I worked as a registered nurse for 15 years. I was in the clinical setting. I did hospital and all that, but it never really resonated with me either, which I found out later contributed to another health problem that I was diagnosed with later, that wrong path, feeling like I wasn't in the right career, not fulfilling my purpose. So along the way, I found health coaching. And that was really my passion. I've been doing that now for about 10 years. And I was having these conversations with women like myself. They'd had traumatic childhoods. They had the onset of autoimmune disease in early adulthood. They instinctively felt that there was some connection as well. So very quickly, my coaching practice started focusing on trauma. Before, that was as popular or well-known as it is today as an approach for healing and recovering from chronic illness. So I was kind of really piecing together this puzzle over the past 10 years that I didn't know what the full picture looked like, because I just knew it was different than what had been in front of me. So along the way, German New Medicine ended up being one of the pieces of that puzzle, and it ended up being kind of, I don't want to say the finishing puzzle piece, but definitely a really profound one, because finally, I was working with, actually, she was a holistic practitioner as well, and she had end-stage bone cancer. And she came to me for some help. And for the first time in her life, she was dealing or open to addressing her own history of trauma. And when we were making the connections together, she said, I remember somewhere in my own certification and credentialing, I learned about this guy, Dr. Hammer, and he told me exactly what you're telling me, that what I went through was connected to my bone cancer diagnosis. So I'm a lifelong student, and I furiously started studying and looking for answers and a community to join to learn more about this German New Medicine. And coming from a medical nursing background, I worked in research for a major university for a while. I love, empirical data, evidence, numbers, case studies, and that's what German New Medicine provided for me. All of a sudden, in the language of medicine was everything that so many of us already know intuitively, that our experiences in life create our physical bodies. They impact our physical bodies. How we perceive things affects our health. And so that really was just the crowning piece on my journey, not just as a coach, but in my own personal health. And I can honestly say I have been up and down and at rock bottom, but right now is the best health that I've been in my entire life. And it continues to get better because I finally understand these connections. So I don't know if you can sense my passion on this topic, but it is there. And that's my story, how I ended up here.
Yeah, definitely. So I kind of was in that same boat as you. I went to school first to be a counselor because I knew almost every issue that I had stemmed from childhood stuff. And I don't even want to say the word trauma, just I knew that limiting beliefs from other people, just things like that. I knew that that is what was impacting me. And then I went down the path of functional medicine and learning all that because I knew that was a piece of the puzzle too. And then I feel like I've circled all the way back to finding German New Medicine and understanding how those events happen, or how those events, German New Medicine is a framework for how the event impacts the person. Mm-hmm. So the ACE studies, we all know that trauma increases physical health symptoms, but German New Medicine gives you kind of what you were mentioning, the exact science and the data that shows how this specific type of psyche conflict will give you this specific set of symptoms. Mm-hmm. And tell me if I'm wrong, but it has never been disproven. It's been proven time and time again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no variation from it. It is an exact science, which is pretty incredible, but it's in line with what we know about so much of the way the universe works and just the perfection in how it's organized. So the human body, we wouldn't expect it to be any different. And I think that's especially empowering when we look at it from a chronic illness perspective, because so many of us went through that, dark period where we felt like my body is attacking me, it's failing me, I'm doing something wrong. And German new medicine flips that narrative, and it helps us realize, I haven't done anything wrong, you haven't done anything wrong. Things happened, we perceived them a certain way, and our body kicked into gear to protect us and said, what do we need to do to survive? And it does that without our conscious awareness, like instantaneously. So it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would love if you could give like a general framework for like how German new medicine works. Like, what are the criteria for the conflicts or the event to be impactful? And what kind of things do you have to like look back at in your life to determine if that was like a trigger?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are definitely some trademarks of what can be called a biological shock. So it is a little bit different from a GNM perspective than just psychological trauma. It's even different than just like chronic increased stress. There are many psychologically traumatic events that a person can go through that might not register as a biological conflict. And I can explain that in a second. There are also things that can register as a biological conflict, and you can have physical symptoms that don't meet like the DSM classification for psychological trauma. So we try, if we're a GNM purist, we don't use those words interchangeably. Of course, a practitioner like myself, I have lots of different modalities that I use, so I do kind of throw the words around. But classically, GNM biological conflict is a shock to the psyche, so your subconscious brain, that was so unexpected. You've never been through anything like that before, so you never could have prepared for it, and it was isolating in some way. So a lot of these conflict shocks happen when we are very young or children, because everything's new and everything is something we've never experienced before. And something like excessive criticism, or the first time we go to kindergarten and we're separated from our mom, to the young child's psyche, can be a biological conflict. It's acute, they've never experienced it before, it's very isolating and scary. And so if things don't happen after the conflict shock that allows the person to resolve it, make their peace with it, and integrate it and move on, it can stick with them for a lifetime and end up showing or manifesting itself as physical symptoms later in life. And that's what happened to me. So it's an invitation from our body and the universe to say, whoa, what do I need to look at here? My body is screaming at me. Something needs to be resolved and integrated so that I can move on with my life.
Yeah, makes sense. And something else that I really love in learning the GNM perspective is that the symptoms are the actual healing phase, and how they explain when you are in quote unquote conflict active stage, that's usually not when you're going to get the more amount of symptoms. And then finally, when you've resolved that conflict on a psyche level, then you start to see all the symptoms. And so it's very opposite of how we look at things in Western medicine.
It is very fascinating, because when we recognize symptoms are actually a sign of healing, so many individuals' stories and timelines make sense. I don't know about you, but I get so many clients that come to me and say, Katherine, I used to be able to do all the things. Like, I was going to school full time, I was working full time, I got married, I had kids. And then they're like, one day it just all changed. And what happened was they were likely in a conflict active phase, which immediately puts the brain into that sympathetic state of fight or flight. You're running on adrenaline, cortisol, you need very little sleep, you don't need to eat much, you feel no pain, but the body can only exist in that state for so long. And then it starts to get run down. So if a resolution happens of that conflict, you can end up pretty quickly in a healing phase where you're having those symptoms of fatigue, pain, inflammation, which is your body saying, slow down, put your feet up, rest, sleep. This is a reconstruction zone internally. The inflammation is there because the body tissues heal in a water and warm environment, and the pain and the fatigue are there to say, slow down and stop working so hard. So many times I've seen women that maybe had a traumatic history of abuse. They were strong through these terrible relationships. They finally broke that cycle. They end up with a wonderful partner. Life is fabulous, and they're diagnosed with crippling Lyme disease and are bedbound for 10 years. That's a true story of one of my clients. And they're like, my life just got great. Why am I sick? It's because you just got safe, and your body finally had the circumstances to switch into parasympathetic mode, heal, and recover from this lifetime of trauma. So it starts to make sense when symptoms appear and why they're appearing.
Yeah, I literally got tears in my eyes just now because this is exactly what happened to me. I had moved 4 cities in 3 years, maybe even 2 years, actually. I went through a very fast whirlwind relationship, moved in, moved back out, broke up, came back to Miami where I had missed, and my issues were skin, lots and lots of skin. So with German New Medicine, it's a separation conflict. So I had been separated from countless things, and I was always very go, 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 Energizer bunny, degrees, school, multiple full-time jobs. And then I met my partner and relaxed, and then all the symptoms started. And he has been my number one safe space and support. So exactly like what you just said.
It happened for me too. When I left the East Coast, where I grew up and lived the first 3 decades of my life, my mother passed away. And so I came out here to California. I finally was away from all the tracks, as German New Medicine called them, the subconscious reminders, my triggers. I was in a new place. There were new challenges, but my partner is now my husband, was very supportive and loving. And I literally was bedridden for 3 months, just in complete healing mode. And I did not know about German New Medicine at that time, but I still had an inclination that that's what was happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Once you start to understand how that nervous system works, and you start to not be so afraid of feeling tired, you're like, something's resolving right now. So I'm going to listen to that and rest, which is something I definitely never did before. I was team no sleep, go, go, go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really reinforced and rewarded in our culture, which is why so many of us in this country, in this kind of Western way of thinking about things, struggle to give our bodies what they need, because we're sold the idea that that's not productive, it's lazy, it's selfish. And so we really fight those limiting beliefs.
Yeah. So something else I wanted to ask you about is how is German New Medicine proven? Because I've seen a lot of brain scans, but obviously you're not doing brain scans. And if it's never been disproven, how many years did this testing? Because you can even look at you could look at lab markers being off and a Lyme diagnosis, and there's an explanation for everything. And I'm just wondering how on earth did they figure this out?
Yeah. And I mean, all that lab work, that information, that data, it's compatible with German New Medicine, which is why I love it so much. I love answers. I love knowing why. I think most of us do. That's what helps us step out of fear when so many of us just ask, why me? Why am I sick? And if I know, I feel like I can maybe handle this. So correct. When we look at German New Medicine, it's still a medical practice. It still requires a level of medical training and knowledge to be able to diagnose, to understand the severity of, for example, a healing phase. Just because healing phase, pain, fatigue, and inflammation are a healing phase, I don't want to confuse people and think it's all rainbows and unicorns, and it doesn't mean something bad can't happen. Sure, you can have a really intense healing phase that can be life-threatening, which is why there's still a place for conventional medicine and sometimes acute intervention to preserve a life. That being said, in recent times, the name for this body of knowledge has shifted from German New Medicine to Germanic healing knowledge. The reason for that, number one, being that many conventional medical practitioners were taking issue with it. So there's a liability if you set yourself up as a body of medicine. But secondary to that, there's really a belief among those who practice and consult in this field that this information should be available to everyone. Everyone should be able to apply these principles, which is what the 5 biological laws are. They're these invariable truths that apply to any situation with our health. We should all have access to this knowledge so that we can have a good relationship with our bodies, understand what's happening, and work in harmony with that. So as in my practice, I primarily focus on women who have an official autoimmune diagnosis, and their lab work, their medical history is important to me. I don't diagnose or treat, but I can interpret, I can translate, I can help them understand what their doctor is telling them through the framework of German New Medicine or Germanic healing knowledge, and then help them come up with really practical solutions and changes in perception to change the course of their prognosis. So that's what I do. So yeah, sure, if you're a doctor, you're going to demand a definitive CT scan to prove, the changes in the brain tissue that says this is the conflict that you're experiencing. But it's not required. We don't have to look in the brain. We can look at the body. We can listen to the story of the individual, and we can make the connections ourselves, often in just a matter of minutes, to know what's happening.
Yeah. And I know that a lot of people find just having the awareness that this event is correlating with what you're going through can be really profound for like restructuring your beliefs and, starting to allow that nervous system to relax a little bit more so you can kind of move through that. But are there other modalities that are helpful? Like, let's say, okay, I know that the skin issue is a separation conflict. Great. What do I do with that information now?
Yeah, I know that's a really good question. And if you go in any like Facebook groups online that are tailored to German New Medicine, the number one question in my DMs is like, how do I resolve my conflict?
Yeah.
Let's reframe that. How do I transform a lifetime of limiting beliefs and childhood programming and traumatic experiences? And, it's not for the faint of heart. I'll say that much.
Definitely not.
That's why when I designed my program in the very beginning, it was called Guilt-Free Self-Care. And my kind of niche was working with women that had, experienced narcissistic abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, young in life, and that had led to, in adulthood, addictions, whether that was to substances or to caretaking and codependent situations. These are all the patterns that I know very well from my own family. And guilt-free self-care was about how do we just start taking apart a little piece at a time of the way that we've learned to do life that's no longer serving us, that is leading me to overextend myself, be resentful, exhausted, perfectionist, good girl, always trying to prove herself. How do we undo that and become a version of ourselves that is more resistant to conflicts? If a biological conflict is something I'm not prepared for, how do I prepare myself better for what happens in life so I can respond in a way that is healthy? I know you've used the term radical self-responsibility. How do I approach my life that way so I'm no longer a victim of what happens to me, but I start looking for this path of things that are happening for me so I can grow and evolve as a person and, become a higher version of myself. Lofty goal. It is possible. It's a lifelong work in progress, but that is why many times childhood illnesses, allergies, and things like that, if we are an intentional human, a conscious adult, we can outgrow a lot of illnesses and intolerances and things by just changing and growing who we are as a person. So much of people join my program thinking it's going to be like medical school with G&M, and then they realize it's a lot of self-growth and self-improvement work.
Yeah, always. I think everybody wants that quick fix. So it's easy to think that somebody can provide it with you. And I think with the awareness of, or at least the awareness that you can look deeper into figuring out where some of the big like psyche conflicts happened can be very helpful. But then you still have to kind of figure out maybe where those triggers are in your life, where you're responsible for like perpetuating those behaviors and thoughts, and any and all modalities, whatever resonates with you. So like I really like havening, EFT. I know people that use hypnosis, breath work, therapy, even just talking it out, super helpful. So there's no right or wrong answer is basically where I'm getting at. I think all of it will work.
Exactly. And
have you had to give up coffee for health reasons? Maybe because of the stress it was putting on your adrenals, maybe because it was messing with your sleep, maybe because you felt terrible after drinking it, or maybe because you were told coffee had mold on the beans and you needed to stay away from mold. Well, what if I told you there's an organic, mycotoxin-free, quality coffee that contains reishi spores or Ganoderma lucidum? Ganoderma lucidum helps to modulate your immune system, adapt to stress, balance hormones, and doesn't give you the jitters or shakes like regular coffee used to. Sounds too good to be true, right? It's called King Coffee by the company Organo. And King Coffee came into my life when I was struggling with chronic hives, full body eczema, and mast cell activation syndrome. I hadn't drank coffee in years because it made me feel anxious, shaky, and clammy. So I had no expectations that drinking King Coffee would be any different. However, I decided to give it a try after seeing lots of amazing practitioners talk about the benefits of reishi online. I tried a 7-day sample and the chronic hives were gone by day 5. I was in shock. After that, I dove into the research on reishi and found that there are over 3,000 peer-reviewed PubMed clinical trials using reishi Ganoderma as an intervention. The company Organo also has a patent protected on their harvesting process. They double crack open the spore shells, which makes them up to 80% more potent than the body of the reishi, which is usually used in other reishi products. This also makes the spores 90% more bioavailable for your body to use. If you would like to try King Coffee, visit thehealerrevolution.myorganogold.com, or for a 7-day trial, you can check out my link tree on my Instagram at Amanda Panacea.
Even a lot of the physical interventions with, nutrition, temperature therapies, all those things have a place in German New Medicine as well. It's just knowing where in the phases of conflict activity versus the first stage of healing versus the second stage of healing, which is really like a detox stage where we're removing the debris and the byproducts of the healing that we just went through. That's when knowing physical modalities are very important as well. So that, like I was saying, like it's all compatible with each other.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So how does something like German New Medicine approach nutrient deficiencies or toxicities?
So I can use my situation as an example, and I don't mean this as medical advice for anyone because I'm not a nutrition expert, but with ulcerative colitis, when I'm in a conflict active phase, I feel pretty good. What's happening in my large intestine, my colon, is that additional cells are being produced. And the purpose of them is to create more surface area for more digestion. Interestingly, though, it's not at that stage digestion of nutrients. It's trying to help me digest an ugly situation in my life that my psyche isn't able to process. For me, growing up, that was abuse. And it was, when I hit 18 that I started to heal from that. I went into a healing phase literally overnight. I woke up to a toilet bowl full of blood and I ran to the emergency room like, what's going on? Well, what happened was I spent a week alone. I had peace. I felt safe. And my brain sent the signal to my colon, we don't need those extra cells anymore. There's nothing to digest. Life is good. And the body says, no problem, let's get rid of them. So it starts shedding the lining of my colon. And that looks like cramping, bloody diarrhea, sorry guys, pus, mucus, literally shedding that lining. And it's really uncomfortable and it's painful and it's scary because I didn't know what was happening. But after that phase passes, during the conflict active phase, you're not really digesting much. When you're in fight or flight, your digestion is offline. So that's when things like nutrient deficiencies can develop if somebody's in long-term conflict activity. In the first stage of healing, when I'm shedding the lining of my colon, I'm also not really absorbing a lot. That can lead to nutritional deficiencies. But somewhere, as the extra cells are let go, my body starts really craving nutrient-dense foods because it's trying to rebuild everything that I lost. So suddenly I have a voracious appetite and I'm craving like really substantial foods like meat and dairy products. Like I want calories, I want protein, I'm trying to get strong again. And then ultimately, in the second phase of healing, there's still that debris that I'm mentioning that needs to kind of finally be flushed out of the system. And then sometimes I really start craving, like, I just want all the fruit and veggie juices. Like I'm really flooding my body with nutrients and I'm taking them in liquid form because there's still some flushing action that's happening. So it's funny because I went through that cycle so many times in my life. And the last time I had a flare up, which was really just a healing phase, and I know exactly the event that caused it, I watched this unfold in front of me and it made sense. So just to answer your question, like, yeah, when we're working in harmony with our body, it makes sense where these nutrient deficiencies come from. Even if I'm eating I had a mother that was very health conscious. My friend described her as liking brown rice before brown rice was cool. We had no sugar in the house. We didn't eat drink soda. It was just really vegetable heavy. But my body really wasn't digesting any of it because I was in constant conflict. So I was underweight and had nutrient deficiencies, even with a perfect diet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I understand. Something you mentioned that is also very unique and opposite of what we learn in like any kind of health coaching or functional medicine program is that bacteria and fungus are actually a part of the healing phase, and they're helping. I can't explain it. If you could explain it better, they're helping. What are they doing exactly, and why are they not to be feared, I guess?
Yeah, the illustration we use a lot in German New Medicine is if you go to a burning house and you see a bunch of firefighters, do you assume that the firefighters started the fire? No, you know that they're there to help fight it. So bacteria are like firefighters in the body. After my colon produced those extra cells to help me deal with the conflict, those cells had to be removed with an inflammatory process, which is like a controlled burn. And the bacteria are there to help during that inflammatory process to literally digest and eliminate those cells that need to be broken down. We see this in nature. If an animal dies and it's alone in the woods, it's consumed not just by other animals, but bacteria and fungus that are present in the soils. And that's what they exist. They're kind of like the garbage collectors of nature. And so they serve a really important role in that process. The bigger a healing phase is, the more bacteria will be present because they have a bigger job to do. So, we look at it as a raging infection. It's really just a really intense healing phase.
And so are there times and situations where it's good to intervene? Because obviously like bacterial infections can be life-threatening. And even if I understood, okay, this is a healing phase, there are times when I'd probably still be like, okay, no, I need antibiotics.
Yeah. And being in California, we understand that, the fire analogy. Just recently, I actually got in big trouble. I was on a camping trip and my girlfriends and I started a fire and we got yelled at because, of course, it can lead to an out of control wildfire if left unchecked. So that can happen. if a conflict is big enough, the healing phase can be big enough that it can be life-threatening. So yeah, thank goodness for modern medicine, we have things like corticosteroids and antibiotics that can preserve life in those cases.
Yeah. And on the topic of steroids, actually, I wanted to ask you this also, because what happened to me in my story was I was being exposed to mold, and I thought that that was what was making me sick and giving me like the rashes and the mast cell. And then I was going to do an immunotherapy called low dose immunotherapy. And the doctor and all the research said it works better if you're less inflamed. So you should take prednisone the first time you do the dose, just to prevent any sort of like really horrible reactions or anaphylaxis. So I took 12 days of prednisone, and just that small amount of prednisone for 12 days sent me into severe, debilitating topical steroid withdrawal. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering, looking back, I correlate why that happened to me with just the state of my nervous system at the time. But I was wondering if you had another opinion about taking steroids when you're in such a really strong healing phase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we see this with steroids, and we see it with something like chemotherapy as well in cancer. They're a medication called the sympathomimetic. So they mimic the sympathetic nervous system action. They enhance or intensify a conflict active phase. So that can be helpful for pulling somebody out of a healing phase and putting them back in a conflict active phase. But if we create too big a conflict active phase, when they stop the medication, there can be a huge blowback in a very intense healing phase. So symptoms can come back 10, 100 times stronger after a big steroid dose.
Yeah, and that would make perfect sense with what I went through, because people take 12 months of steroids and don't have the same reaction that I did. So I feel like I was already going through such a strong resolution of so many different traumatic behaviors. I was changing so many things at once that my healing phase was extra intense.
Yeah. It's kind of like once we find one thing, another, and it kind of snowballs, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had changed a lifetime of drinking and generational patterns and passed down of addiction. And I was doing a lot of emotional work, and it just makes perfect sense looking back that my healing symptoms were so significant.
Yeah, like even body workers know there can be a healing crisis where the healing just comes so fast and so strong that they try to go at a pace that the body's ready for, which is why, German new medicine does not recommend any type of healing modality where you rip someone's trauma or coping mechanisms away, because you can leave them worse off. So there are some conflicts. It's safer to just let people stay in conflict than throw them into a healing phase that'll, bowl them over.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. Are there any types of conflicts that should not be resolved, or is there anything that can happen in healing phase that's life-threatening?
Yes. And I'm always very cautious of what I share about these, because as a recovering hypochondriac, I know that sometimes we put the idea in our heads and then we think that's me. I have that. I can say that, the doctor that originally researched this body of knowledge, Dr. Hammer, I don't know him personally. The internet says lots of things about him. People can choose to believe what they want, but those that worked closest with him said that he was a very intuitive healer, and he knew when it was best to not tell the person what their conflict was, because the awareness and resolution of it could be fatal. The biggest place we see that is with certain heart-related conflicts, where in the healing phase you can experience, myocardial infarction or a heart attack and die. Again, risk factors, it's much more common in men of a certain age, men of a certain lifestyle. It's not a very common risk in the population of women that I work with autoimmune disease, where we're looking at, chronic inflammatory symptoms. But that is a reason to consider working with a trained practitioner, someone with a medical background. It's one of the things I highlight as a benefit of working with me. There are lots of German new medicine literate coaches that have mind-body skills, but they don't have the medical knowledge to know how to proceed or not proceed safely in certain areas. So something to just think about, as with any modality, do consult your practitioner before starting any new protocol or program, just to be safe. You don't want to go in digging around when you don't know what you're dealing with. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, makes a lot of sense for sure. And I think you can see that in any healing modality that you choose. So whether it's, taking supplements, even you can have a Herxheimer reaction. And there are examples of this in anything that you choose. And slow and steady always wins the race. That's something that me and a lot of people definitely learn the hard way. But especially like with emotional work, in my own practice, I try to give people as many tools as I can for self-soothing before we move into like, all right, let's take a look at our emotional health and maybe start to peel back the layers of difficult situations. But there has to be a lot of build up before we even get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. Like, I think your background in training is really beneficial, because I would say my concern when I work with a client, more greater than the risk that they could have a life-threatening healing crisis, I am very concerned with not psychologically re-traumatizing a client. There are some practitioners that will tell you, you have to remember your first memory related to the conflict. I disagree. I have had lots of good success downgrading conflicts with my clients, and we don't have to push the buttons that hurt too much. So I practice from a trauma-informed perspective. And I'm really big, like you said, teaching them self-soothing, grounding, how to feel safe before we gently look at conflict themes that need resolution.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. Well, that kind of leads perfect into my next couple of questions. So do you still work with clients one-on-one? I know you have a group program that you run. What does like your business look like at this point?
Yeah, we're actually right on the cusp of a really exciting launch. We spent this past year building the foundation, and my two goals have always been accessibility and affordability, and that looks different for every person. So I have very budget-friendly group community course access available to those that are very self-motivated, self-led, all the way up to I do very premium, high touch, very intensive one-on-one coaching with clients that goes longer term with bigger investment. And the truth is, you can see the same results at any level. It's not dependent on how much you pay. It's just knowing yourself and what your learning style is, and what kind of mentorship, coaching, or support that you personally want on the journey. So I try to make something for everyone.
Yeah, perfect. And some people are ready to dive in really deep and do one-on-one, and some people are just dipping their toes. So having something a little less intense is always helpful as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that your niche is autoimmune. I mentioned the big conflict with skin is, well, the eczema that I was going through is a separation conflict. Mm-hmm. So with autoimmune, what are some of those themes in the conflicts that you see?
Yeah, so I use the term autoimmune loosely because from a German new medicine perspective, there is no such thing as autoimmune, but that's the terminology I know from nursing. Mm-hmm. So I work with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, anxiety, depression, digestive issues, skin issues, such as yours as well. So with chronic pain, I see a lot of things like fibromyalgia, arthritis, and Lyme. And those tend to have a theme of self-devaluation or separation. And so there's a lot of chronic self-neglect, self-esteem issues, excuse me, when working with those individuals. A lot of those individuals also came from abusive backgrounds or are currently in abusive partnerships, and their body is screaming that. Same with the skin issues, a lot of, eczema, hives, certain mast cell symptoms. That was something that I went through myself. I had a lot of food intolerances around the time that my mom was dying. It was super high stress. And so I developed allergies to nuts and fruits and things like that. So I had to overcome that with brain retraining. With digestive issues like mine and the colon and the small intestine, stomach, reflux, things like that. It's a lot of what we call an indigestible morsel conflict. It's very often when we don't feel safe to express ourselves or our needs, and we have to stuff it down and we can't process it. So the body holds it in the digestive tract. There's often an element of anger, either the person's anger directed at us that we can't fight back against, or our own anger or resentment that we can't process. With the anxiety, with thyroid issues, Hashimoto's, I see a lot of powerlessness and fear that these individuals have experienced in life. Or, if they're chronic people pleasers and perfectionists, the constant pushing, going, that really affects the endocrine system. Like I said, the hypothyroidism, the adrenal failure or fatigue, that's something else that I have been through personally. I was officially diagnosed with Addison's disease, although just recently I've started improving leaps and bounds in that area. So I have hope that, a full recovery from that will be possible. So yeah, a lot of the self-devaluation, indigestible morsel, separation conflicts, powerlessness, fear, that's what I work with a lot.
Fascinating. On the topic of Addison's, does this also translate for pets as well? Because my sister's dog has Addison's, and she went through a lot of early childhood trauma. She was taken from my sister at a very young age. And, even her and myself have discussed, like, we think that was a really big trigger for why she now has Addison's.
Yes, absolutely. There are two themes for Addison's. One is overwhelming negative stress.
Oh, poor little dog.
Right. The other, now this is more existential, but the other is being on the wrong path in life. So maybe the dog is not fulfilling its highest desires. I don't know. I'm just teasing. But yeah, no, this is any biological organism suffers from these exact same conflict themes. And they're often more literal. Like a dog might have ulcerative colitis, but it's because he can't digest a bone versus having ulcerative colitis because I can't digest, excessive criticism or abusive speech or things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the company that I work for and I use their bioenergetic testing, we have one that is we call it the awareness scan, and it tests for imbalances or resonating like emotional patterns and behaviors. Don't ask me how you can tell this from hair and saliva, because it's always dead on. And we have a few people who have done the awareness scan for their pets. And some of the adorable things that came up, I'm remembering one, it was like a very small dog, and it was like, he has a hard time determining like what his job is, and he thinks of himself as much more important than he is.
Can you not? I think one of my dogs might have that conflict. I think you have a new career as a Dr. Doolittle, because we all know what our pets are thinking.
Yeah, well, you can do this. You can definitely do a scan for him. Yeah, it's so cute. And then the owner, they decided, okay, well, we're gonna like praise when he thinks he's doing his job to like protect us. And they said it really changed like how they act and how afraid they are and how much they bark, and just shifting that a little bit was really helpful.
That's amazing. I 100% see the truth in that.
Yeah. Interesting, right? So yeah, I could probably ask so many questions about German medicine, but it's just such a fascinating and deep base of knowledge, and anyone and everyone can get on the Learning German New Medicine site. I think it's just learninggnm.com. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you can look up if you have a condition or if you have an organ that has stress. And so you can start to, look up these patterns if you dare to do that on your own. And
I always want to tell people, don't panic.
Yeah.
It gets really heavy in the medical terminology. So one of my goals, and that I've been doing systematically, is translating the information, the medical information we have, into more of like layman's terms, so that people
that's great.
navigate it themselves more easily.
Yeah, that's really needed. That site is really intense. And I think the big thing to point out with that site is it talks about areas of the brain and cells and all sorts of words you don't really need to pay attention to. The part that is your responsibility is to that awareness around what the psyche conflict was, and then using some of those tools to kind of unravel it and heal from it. And also the shift in mindset from symptoms being always that something's wrong, and shifting into knowing that your body's doing a good job. It's doing what it's supposed to do. You have resolved something, like you are in healing phase now. So it should pass.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happens when it doesn't pass? Like what happens when people are in chronic pain and allergies that don't seem to ever go away?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in those cases, we're usually looking at one of two things. We're either looking at a recurring conflict, which is, I keep using this illustration because it's kind of like the easy one to grab, but I'm in an abusive relationship and then I leave it. And either I go back to that partner or I repeat it in my next relationship. And so I have long-term fibromyalgia because I haven't broken that cycle of being in relationships where my self-esteem continues to suffer. The other thing that could be happening is a hanging healing, which, for example, in my case, there was a very specific source of abusive speech when I was a child, very like a narcissistic personality that I was exposed to. I set boundaries and separated from that individual. However, my ulcerative colitis did not go into remission because suddenly I was choosing a boyfriend that was treating me the same way. And it tricked my brain into thinking I was right back in that situation. And then I thought, like, I started picking better romantic partners, but then suddenly I was working for employers that have the same personality. And I realized I had just become a magnet for these things because I had learned to, when we say attract, we don't attract abuse, but I learned to show up as a person that wasn't seeing the red flags because the devil, right? Like it was familiar to me. Mm-hmm. So I really have been on this journey working to be a person that understands that that's not acceptable, that's not okay, and to really project that into the world so that, I don't, it's funny because I can be around certain personality types now for, an hour and the hatchet comes down. I'm like, nope, like my whole body is allergic to narcissistic traits now. Yeah. Whereas in the past, I could be months into a relationship, years into a job, and I knew how to deal with it, but it was destroying my health. And now it's like, I'm just like, nope, get me out of here. We're done.
I'm the same way with like alcohol and drug use. It was so normalized and it was just what everybody did all the time. And now I'm like, absolutely not. I will not be around that. I'm allergic. I like
my husband used to ask me, I used to say when he and I first got together, like I would tell him about these personalities and how they affected me. And I would always come back to him, this time I've learned. And then the thing would happen again. And he would just kind of laugh at me. So I just want people to know it's okay if it takes time because it's a process. And I could still be vulnerable in the future, but I think my radar is a little better now.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation. Hopefully I can have you on again, maybe to go even deeper into this topic because you're very knowledgeable and it seems like you live this in and out, have it down pat. So if you could tell everyone like where to find you and I guess like what your offerings are that you have currently.
Yeah, so you can find me on my website. It's www. Do we still say that anymore? The autoimmuneresolution.com, and Instagram is the Autoimmune Resolution. And I'm always sharing my personal insights and reflections on German new medicine. So if you want to dip your toe just on social media, there's a lot to consume there. And then I am opening my membership, which is called the Autoimmune Resolution, in September. And it's like a monthly membership where we have lots of support. There's already a very active community because we've been around for a while. And I'm starting out doing a different theme each month. So that way I can really give attention to new members on their diagnosis and symptoms. So I am starting out in September for anybody that has digestive issues. And you can have digestive issues and other diagnoses, but if that's the main thing that's troubling you right now, that might interest you. October is going to be endocrine issues like thyroid and adrenal, and we'll just keep building from there. And then I have rolling applications if folks are interested in reaching out to work with me one-on-one. So I just keep, the best place to get that information is Instagram, whatever's happening in my world.
Yeah, same with everybody else.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this won't be out till September anyway, so just let me know what date, and I can try to align it so you can have this to send to people also.
Awesome. All right. Well, it's been so fun.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you everyone for listening, and I will see you all shortly. Thank you so much for listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. If you're enjoying what you're listening to, please do me a favor and subscribe, leave a comment, anything that can help get this information out to more people who may be struggling. You can also find me online at thehealerrevolution.com or amandapanacea.com, and you can also find me on Instagram at amandapanacea. Thank you so much for joining the revolution.